Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the People Overview Committee. Before we start, I need to inform you that this meeting has been live streamed and recorded. Item 1, apologies. I just have apologies from Sean Lines and Sim. Do you have any disclosable pecuniary interest? No? Yes, I run an children's.
Personal interest in that with a family member attending 7 days ago.
Minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of February. Very happy with them? Can you move them? Second? All in favour? Okay. Thank you. Public question time, there are none. Member question time, there are none. I'm now going to take item 7 as item 6, if that's okay, the Children and Young People Complex Needs Summit. And I'm going to ask all our visitors if they'd introduce themselves to our board, our committee, even.
Hello, I'm Sarah Thomas. I'm the parent carer and the participation lead for Shropshire Parent and Carers Council.
Okay.
Zara Bowden, I'm the Communication and Engagement Lead for Shropshire's Parent and Carer Council. Good morning everyone, I'm Karen Lavelle, I'm the Service Manager for Special Educational Needs and Inclusion at Shropshire Council.
Good morning everyone, I'm David Shaw, Assistant Director of Education and Children at Shropshire Council.
Good morning, I'm Claire Parker, I'm Director of Partnerships in Place at NHS Shropshire Telford and Wrekin.
Hi all, I'm Jennifer Grudgeon, Designated Clinical Officer for SEND, employed by NHS Shropshire Telford and Wrekin.
Hello, can you hear me okay? I don't have a mic. My name is Tracy Jones. I am, as of yesterday, the Director for Mental Health, Learning Disabilities and Autism, Children and Young People for NHS Shropshire Telford and Wrekin ICB.
Gosh, we have us for the first meeting. Well, thank you all and welcome. Who's starting? Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to take the paper as read. We had a complex care children's summit. I think it's 2 or 3 weeks ago now. It was a system meeting, so Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. Unfortunately, Telford got their SEND inspection call on that very morning, so most of them had to disappear. And as you'll remember from October, Shropshire were in the same position. The summit was really good, actually. It was really thought-provoking. We set it up to look at a number of areas that we haven't actually really focused on before from a children's complex needs process before. We wanted to look at mental health support. We wanted to look at preparing for adulthood, and we wanted to look at early help and intervention. And the paper sets out really the outputs of that meeting, the key themes and the discussion points. It was we had a super patient story, sorry, I should say patient citizen story, very NHS, sorry, from a single parent and her son. And they really set out the problems and issues of having a child with special educational needs and disability in our system, and the challenges both across health and care about getting support and help when it was needed. So the next steps for the outputs of that, there is a Children and Young People's Families and SEND System Partnership Board, which I currently chair, which I'll probably hand over to Tracy over the coming months. But we will be putting all the outputs of that into our priority work plan and starting to take those forward with some clear action planning and some milestones to make sure that we're getting the assurance that the work that came out of that summit is being taken forward both proactively, and that we can provide assurance both into the Integrated Care Board and both to the local authorities, both for Shropshire and Telford. I'm not going to say any more than that because I just think it would be really, really helpful. I wonder if Sarah and Zara and David, possibly Tanya, would just like to comment on some of the outputs of that meeting, and then open up to questions if that's okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah. Which one was it? No. Yeah.
Can you turn your mic up? That's why that one's going green, I think. Yeah.
There you go. Thank you. As Claire said, it was a really useful meeting because from our perspective in particular, it gave us a chance to have conversations that we hadn't had before, and actually some messages that we felt were really important were heard. There was a strong message around supporting parent care and mental health and physical health needs, which too often is overlooked, but particularly when you're talking about young people who are identified with complex needs from birth, then, you know, the role of the parent carer is incredibly important, and the role of the family is incredibly important, and the system tends to focus on the young people rather than the wider needs of the family. That led on to a conversation about earlier holistic family support and how important that is. We also could clearly see from the examples given that the system is still not joining up, and that, you know, means education, social care and health being proactive but working together and recognising that they all have a part to play in supporting that one young person. So, for example, one of the examples given was that for a significant period of time, the young person and the parent had been struggling to receive support around communication in school. Unfortunately, what happened eventually in this case was the young person did move into residential care. The parent felt that while the young man's needs were complex and that residential care may have had a role to play in the future, that if more help had been given earlier, the journey to that place could have been very different, but also it might not have happened until later. He's now in residential care. He's thriving with the level of support that is being able to be provided, but most importantly, he is now getting specific support to enable him to communicate. That actually, if that had been available from an earlier point in time, you know, when we talk about services like portage, we talk about the way speech and language work in a school setting, and he was at 7 Down, especially a school setting, then actually that may have helped with some of the behaviours that became too challenging and too difficult if he was able to communicate and express some of his frustration. And I think the other message that came out was about, you know, while nobody's got a crystal ball and we don't know the future for any young person, when a young person is diagnosed with a complex need, with a chromosome abnormality, with a syndrome or a condition, we do know something about their future needs, but we're not thinking ahead enough for those families as yet.
And what was really interesting was this was probably the first time that we've really heard from the 3 core areas of support within the system speaking consistently, cohesively, and almost with one voice. Even the service providers that were there in the room at the time were speaking in the same language, were on the same page, and it feels like if we'd have had this conversation 3 years ago, that would have been very different. But it feels like we're in a place of real positive momentum, and we were very enthusiastic about the positive messages and the fact that it felt like everybody understands what the outcome we're all aiming to achieve is, and that we're all going to work together to get there, which is a really, really positive outcome from the day, if nothing else.
If I may add to that, Chair, I would absolutely agree with what Claire's said, Sarah and Zara. I think from an education perspective, and you'll see this in the accelerated progress plan that we share on step 2 in the next agenda item, what we're trying now to do is connect things together, and that's been a real challenge previously. And you'll have seen from the inspection report for Shropshire from November that the progress we've made is around that connection so that we can really start to move things forward. We're not there yet. I think we absolutely need to acknowledge that, but this momentum in moving things forward in the right way. And we're, again, you'll see this later, we'll step you through some of the work that we need to do at pace now to really drive these areas forward as an education, health, social care system to ensure that our children, people and families get the right support at the right time. That's a key priority for us.
Just a final comment from me, and be remiss of me not to say something, I think, but I guess this system, as in the Shropshire Health and Care System, focused a lot on older adults and ambulances and the acute trust. This was the first time that this system had a focus session on children, young people, their families with complex needs. So a really important event for this system, and one that will need to be repeated to make sure that what we said during the summit in terms of those key actions are followed through and are taken to the Integrated Care Board in terms of making sure that children, young people with complex needs are talked about as much as we talk about older adults, the acute trust and ambulances. So huge thank you to them around the table for their commitment and support in getting that scope right, because it was important to get the scope right, wasn't it? To get the right outcome on that day. So thank you.
Really sounds as though some good improvements are going to be made from this. You're all working together. We're all looking after the same people, aren't we? Sorry, any questions of anybody?
Thank you. That really sounds so encouraging. Yeah. I was just wondering if you could give us an example of how the agencies are now all working together. Is that by having one appointment to the family just go and or what are you, just an example of how you're actually achieving what you're aiming to achieve?
I was going to say, Jen, do you want
Talk about SLC,
I think that'd be
maybe.
a perfect example.
So we'll come on to this.
Jenny, I'm going to just.
Yes. There we go. Thank you. So we'll come on to this more in terms of the accelerated progress plan. But when we are thinking as a system, we're thinking about our support for speech, language and communication needs. We have our plans in place are multi-agency from a commissioning perspective, but also from a provision of speech, language and communication support. We acknowledge as a system that speech, language and communication needs can only be met and supported sufficiently if we have our schools in place supporting us, if the specialist SLT services are in place, if the rest of our health workforce and social care workforce are all committed to the same agenda, and have clarity that actually all parts of the system can make a difference for that cohort of children and young people. And so since 2021, we've had a system-wide multi-agency work stream around supporting speech, language and communication needs, which has resulted in some of the interventions such as Talk Boost, which is one of our local interventions that schools are primarily delivering with the support of health services. So I think that's one of the examples where we have come together as a system, and although again, we'll probably talk about this more in the next item, but although we have waiting time challenges around the speech and language therapy service, in the inspection report there was acknowledgement that there is provision in place to support those children and young people prior to being seen by the specialist service, which is was acknowledged as a really valuable piece of support.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It's really encouraging to hear directly from parents and carers. But for the last 3 years, you must have been so frustrated by all of this. And my question sort of crosses over the two reports we're going to discuss today. And really, why has it taken the Ofsted report that we had to get to this moving forward position that we're discussing today? And what oversight was there before Ofsted came in, and are we sure that the actions identified and we're discussing today are really going to prevent this happening again and give reassurance to parents and carers and their families that moving forward things are on the right track and will remain so?
Shall I start? That's...
Can I just say something as well? I mean, I think possibly, Ruth, that's probably for the next report, but because otherwise they'll both get tied up together. But so you want to ask a question, well, but because I've got loads of questions on the next report.
I think it's sort of oversees both, but I'll take a chance.
did you want to just?
It's entirely to you, Chair, in terms of if you want me to respond to some of that, I think some of that will sit with obviously the partnership education. I think it's also response from health as well. So do you want us to respond?
Shall we pass on yours and do it to the next one, if that's all right with you? Okay. Anybody else got any questions?
I think the important bit for this scrutiny is about making sure that you hold us to account now, because we have absolutely committed to our young people and families that things will be different. And if you read through the report, you know, there are some key recommendations there about, as a system, understanding threshold. And I think that's a frustration that certainly our families say constantly, certainly told us during the Ofsted revisit inspection, that they feel that their child, their young person, is often passed around the system because it doesn't quite meet the threshold, and we need to commit to understanding what's going to be different moving forward. So the experiences for our families will be different into the future. Likewise, we've committed to reviewing pathways, particularly for a child who perhaps experienced trauma. So we might make that child safe in terms of domestic abuse, for example, but what is the offer to that child or young person to support them through those experiences they might have experienced in that environment? So it's really important. I think we come back to committee in terms of, we said we would do, what have we done? There are certainly some commission on both sides from the local authority, as well as the ICB, around what we can do differently with our current commission providers, but also looking at what the gaps are.
So the recommendations were, we note the contents of the report, and we to ask the Children, Young People, Families and SEND System Partnership Board to take the outputs of the summit and monitor delivery and provide assurance against the actions within the CYP work plan. And then I'd put a bit after, well, when can we get an update?
Mm-hmm.
6 months, that'd be acceptable, get an update.
Yep. Everybody?
Chair, may I just add as well that as part of the 5-year forward planning process that we're doing as well, which I'm leading on at the moment, it's very fortuitous that the CYP bit, I've got the pen in my hand, and actually I'm going to work with parent and carers around a piece of co-production about what goes into the plan, both for the immediate on the actions that are coming out from the complex care needs, and our sort of future ambition around our children and young people. So we're going to get that that co-production piece into the plan right at the start, in red, in bold.
Can I just say though, sorry, put my mic on. I stated every meeting, but I think you need performance indicators as well, and especially for the, you know, the parents and carers of the young people, because they need to know that things are happening, and when they talk to other people, you know, and they say you're going to these meetings, what you're doing, you can actually show what you're doing, and then when you come back, we can invite them back and actually see what you've been doing. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep. Are you okay with that? Yes.
So I mean, from the officer supporting the committee on this, I think there's some really good things to sort of consider. So not necessarily for now, but what I would encourage members to do is, there are a few bits I wrote down there and I think would be possibly interesting to consider as a future topic or topic areas, or have conversations with Tanya and the other people in the room about where you could maybe add value. So which really stood out to me there was listening from the parent carer perspective. Well, what is it that from their perspective they want to see more of? And if we go down Claire's bit about what do we want to measure and what we want to see, what would that look like? How would we want to see that done? How would parent carers want to see that reflected? And what would they recognise that to be? So I think there's a useful role potentially for members of the committee to be involved in working and forming that. I think there's also, I was really interested in the greater need for the system partners to be more joined up. I thought that really chimed well with some things I've heard in other places. So again, is there something that the committee could be involved in looking at and helping add value to that, or even have be a mirror and reflect that back almost as a group which tracks alongside with that one. And the one that really chimed with me was that idea about getting ahead of the curve. If we know what someone's needs are, based on their conditions, how is that being factored into that forward planning of services, and how are all of the systems coming together? So I thought three really solid areas. One just from system development and for the areas to be doing, but if I were advising you as members of the committee to consider potential work programme topics for the future, any one of those could be really useful. And I think with the right scoping, with the right officers involved across and with the parent carers, you can add value substantially. Just based on what I've heard there, objectively, there's a chance for the committee to step into that space and do some big stuff.
I think I'd agree with everything you said there. This is a subject we've been, banging the drum for a long time. So to see people actually getting together and putting this work in, it's uplifting at last. Okay, if we're finished on that, then we'll start on the local authority SEND inspection report. Taking on that.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that the NHS put up the accelerated action plan on the screen so that everyone could see what today's meeting really is all about. I was quite disappointed in that this action plan, this accelerated action plan is going to be sent back to the Department of Education and Health by the 6th of April. And when I had a look at it, when it appeared on the agenda paper last Thursday, I think only 20% of it had actually been filled in. So Peggy and I did actually meet up and talk to Claire about that. And I think the other thing was as well that it was in such small writing that I had to put it on A3 to even actually have a bit of a look at it. And what we were sent this morning by Tom is a lot better than what we had last week, but it's still nowhere. Well, I'd worry if it was me, if it was my deadline for the 6th of April. So I actually think that it would be helpful to put the action plan up on the screen so that we can go through it and get Claire Parker and the team from Health to actually go through it with us.
Yeah, can David just introduce?
Oh, you can introduce, yeah, okay. Okay, we'll put that bit on.
Thanks, Claire.
Yeah.
Would you mind just turning your mic off?
Yeah, sorry.
It's fine. Okay, so this is working out.
Anymore.
So as a way of introduction, obviously the original report was around the update on the SEND inspection, which occurred in November. We've included the actual inspection report so you can see verbatim what Ofsted actually said in terms of the progress that the area has made. And when we talk about the area, this isn't just the local authority, this is the system. So this is the NHS, schools, early year settings, families and local authority acting together as a partnership. And I think what I would say is context, it was probably just after this time last year that Karen and I attended this same committee actually, and others like it. And we shared some real concerns. At that point, out of 6 areas that were identified from the original SEND inspection in 2020, we raised concerns that we were at risk of 0, none of those being signed off as sufficient progress. So whilst we've got some recommendations that one of them is actually to commend the partnership, and I've already said we're certainly not saying this work is done. In a year, there's been some real movement in this. I think that's also shared with Sarah and Zara in terms of the difference that they're seeing. We're not done yet, which is a really key message to drive home, but we can see direction travel, and Ofsted saw that direction travel when they inspected it in November. And what we certainly haven't done is stop, we've continued that work. So as Claire rightly challenged, myself, Claire and other colleagues, in terms of the plan, this is a draft plan. So we've been asked by NHS England and the Department of Education on behalf of Ofsted to continue to engage with them around this. So it is a developing plan. What they were at pains to point out to all of us is they don't just want something to land on their email inbox as a finished document. They want to see it in development. Otherwise, they'll just simply say, no, that's not going to be approved. So we have to continue that engagement. So today's opportunity to put it on the screen, as Claire has shared, I think is an absolute ideal one, and one that we as officers and colleagues across the partnership really value in terms of the work. So what we propose really is, in terms of taking the report as read, you've got the inspection report there, happy to pick up any questions, but I think the meat of today's session is around stepping through the detail in this actually. I think is useful. And we can draw out, Councillor Holton, your question in terms of oversight and governance of this. So to put a bit of context around this, the partnership board will be responsible for the overarching delivery of this. The partnership board has been changed very recently. So previously, up until March this year, we've had two boards. We've had a strategic board and we've had a more operational strategic partnership board. We've amalgamated those two groups so that we have one group driving this work. So that includes Tanya, includes Gareth Robinson, the executive lead for SEND across the ICS. So again, we've got the most senior officers, myself and other colleagues, Sarah, Zara, etc., across the entire partnership in that space. So that is the group that will oversee this. That reports into the Health and Wellbeing Board as a statutory group, but also, as Claire's alluded to, we have a ICS, Shropshire, Telstra and Wrekin, Children, Young People and Families Board. So those system level challenges, two of which we're talking about today in this plan, are discussed and really gripped in that group there. So from the SEND Partnership Board for Shropshire and that system board together, we are the governance group that will hold this plan to account. Who will hold us to account? You, clearly, but also the Department of Education and NHS England. And should we not deliver this plan, there are serious consequences in terms of us not doing that actually. Ofsted have visited twice. We've not made sufficient progress in 3 areas. That's really, really serious. You know, we absolutely understand that. You've heard from families the difference that makes and the challenges that young people and families experience because of that. So we're acutely aware that we absolutely have to get this right moving forward now. But there's an energy and a drive to do absolutely that. So I'll pause there, and I think we'll hand over and step through section by section, if that's okay with committee members. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just also add that if you look at the SEND report and what you've obviously got to pull your socks up on, all of those really relate to health. And this is why I want the action plan up there, because, you know, they are an important partner, but they need to come to the table and they need to show us that they can deliver. So look forward to the updated plan on the screen.
So I'll hand over to Jen, Tracy, colleagues.
So I'll start our talking through the plan, but welcome any questions as we go along. And so the first priority area is around those waiting for ASD and ADHD diagnostic pathways. In terms of our actions for support, that number one, that block of actions is all around supporting children and young people to be well whilst they wait. We acknowledge the waiting times, and further down in the plan there's how we are going to address the waiting times. But actually, as children and young people wait, it's important that there's a clarity of the support available to them. As a local area, we do have support available, but we need to be much clearer in terms of demonstrating and being clear about our offer of support so that it's easier to navigate for families and young people. And so all of those first set of actions are all around pulling together that offer of support and ensuring that it's clearly advertised and easier to navigate as somebody needing to use those services.
Can we just add to that, Jen? In terms of, just to pick up on what Claire has said, and from our perspective, yes, there are some high level issues that appear to be about health on the surface. So talk about speech and language, talk about the ND pathway. But actually, when you're talking about waiting well, and what we hear from families is actually we need the whole system working together. So actually that waiting well is about what is early help doing for SEND, and there are conversations we're having at the moment around, there isn't really an early help offer for the SEND families, and how do we develop that? So from our perspective, it's very much around there are some good work being done across the board by all of the sectors, but actually it's the gaps in between that people are falling between, and that's what we really need to join up. And we shouldn't see any of these as just being a health issue or a local authority issue. Our children don't fit into boxes. This is why Zara and I have to go to so many meetings, because the system is all split down into particular pieces. We're talking about supporting the whole child or the whole family. So, and it is about everybody stepping up.
And crucially, it's about the responsibility that each partner at the table holds in being a conduit for families to access all of those different pieces of the puzzle. So we're talking a lot about in the ND care and support pathways that wrap around that waiting well agenda, around how organisations that are health organisations or services that are commissioned by the local authority actually have a duty to work with and connect families to other parts of the system, rather than being very introspective of, well, we've spoken to you once, here's what we can offer you about what we've heard you say, rather than saying, we've spoke to you, we've heard you say this, that and the other, and here's how we can help you connect to other parts of the system.
And if I can just add to that from an education perspective, I've just flicked up, and we can share this at a different point. If you look at the primary need profiles, and I think I've shared this with this committee before, it's quite different for Shropshire than it is nationally. So there's some challenges around that. So from an early years, school, primary, secondary perspective, it's understanding some of the differences. And I think that waiting well applies equally to schools. So we've got that SEND support where there's no diagnosis required in terms of offering something that's additional to or different from the universal standard curriculum. But what we see is far fewer young people offered that support who are perhaps neurodiverse, so they've got ASD or ADHD type conditions than we do nationally. And similarly, we've got a lower level of educational and care plans for those categories. So we'll come on to the EHCP section a bit later, and we'll probably talk about some of the changes that we've seen over the last 3 to 4 months, Karen, actually, in terms of the numbers coming through. And what that's telling us about almost the rebalancing of demand in the system, actually, that we're experiencing that, and the families are equally seeing this play through as well. So we're definitely seeing movement, I think, is the key message. I'll hand you back to Jen.
Thank you. So moving on to section 2, this is around what David's been referring to in terms of the support as a system that we offer to schools and education settings to ensure that they are able to support children and young people who may have a diagnosis or may present as potentially needing to go down a diagnostic pathway. The main drive there is around training, coaching, models of best practice or examples of best practice being shared across the system to ensure that all of our schools and settings are a good standard in terms of meeting the needs of those children and young people. If we can just move down to section 3, if that's okay. And similarly, acknowledging what Sarah and Zara were saying in terms of the support that's needed for parents and carers at various points in the stage of their child or young person's life. This section is around enhancing that support. Some of this speaks to post-diagnostic support. The first action there is around post-diagnostic support. But there's also discussions around peer support and various initiatives that are taking place to help the families support their children and young people.
And Jen, we have mentioned we would like to see a conversation about social care support in that section as well, because there is clear evidence from national work around supporting autism and autism in schools that the opportunity for a break from that caring role is really fundamental for these families.
In terms of section 4, so this is some work that we are trialling around the role of ND practitioners and use of the Dimensions tool, which is specific initiatives for those who may have ASD or ADHD and ND more broadly. And work is ongoing to finalise the job descriptions around those ND practitioner roles and identify the locality that they will be best placed in to serve our community best in a pilot format, because we acknowledge that it's a new initiative and it's appropriate to test it out on a smaller scale and drive up. And as with all of these pieces of work, our parents and carers have been very much involved in the implementation or the design around these initiatives.
Can I just stop you there? So it is a big improvement because you've got dates down the right hand side. I was going to ask a question later about your RAG rating because it is a bit confusing. But so actions to enable and enhance support. So you've got April 24, September 23. But my concern in all this is you've got a date down there, but we want to know when you're actually going to deliver. So you've got a date there, but you might have somebody was talking to me this morning and they had an 18-month wait. So when we see the dates down there, we see dates, but we want to know that something's actually going to happen on those dates. What's going to actually happen on those dates?
So all of the support listed thus far, you don't require a diagnosis. So yes, those long diagnostic waits are there, but they aren't stopping or preventing a child or young person accessing any of this support that's listed thus far. So in terms of the September 23, that's where our ND practitioners will be in post.
Okay, so sorry to come back to you. I'm not medical, but if you haven't got a diagnosis, how can you support people correctly?
So within the school system and across the school and education system, as well as all of our systems, there's a strong ability for those settings to identify children who require something different, who maybe at some point get a diagnosis. And it's absolutely appropriate for schools to implement a range of interventions and support without requiring that diagnosis. There are supports and interventions that are actually very helpful to a lot of the school population, but particularly those who may end up with an ASD or an ADHD diagnosis. And we'll be encouraging our schools and settings and the workforce across the piece to be implementing those interventions at the earliest possible point based on the indications of their observations. David, you might be able to come in there.
Absolutely. I think to answer the question, Claire, it would being really, really practical, whether it's early years, primary or secondary, it would be the behaviours, it might be the speech, it might be the way a child interacts or doesn't interact with another young person or an adult. It might be something that just gives you a reason just to think, what's going on? There's something different. Conversation with a family member who, let's be realistic, the family member will be with their child much more than an education professional will be. So it's having those conversations. It's those behaviours. I mean, and hence why in the lead people we've got education psychology professionals involved in this, because it's those levels of understanding that don't require a specific diagnosis or even necessarily an assessment as such. You can pick these trains up. I mean, as an education professional myself, you get to know the young people that you're working with, and you can start to see those. I mean, obviously as in early years, you will have experienced this as well. So where you've got a young person perhaps whose speech has developed, or there's something physically different that makes it difficult for them to access education, or in their social emotional learning, we can pick those aspects up and then put something in place that's different. That may be a very specific 4 or 5 programme session to develop their emotions, or have engagement with the young person, or improve an aspect of their well-being, or lots of other different opportunities. It could be something completely different. It could be a slightly different way of engaging that a teaching assistant or a teacher or an early years practitioner may well provide. It's all of those different kinds of conversations, really. So what we're describing is something that I don't think has been well established in Shropshire previously. It's all of the things that support the point that's been made around waiting well. So this isn't the bit that the health college will get onto in terms of the clinical diagnostic process. That's a separate conversation. But none of that stops us, schools, early year settings, exploring and working differently with our children and people. And I think that's what, from families' perspectives, and we've heard this from over 700 families in the Ofsted inspection, that the response, and our Pritchard, the lead inspector, fed that back to us. The response wasn't that that they were really frustrated. At times they were, and there were issues with that, but that's a separate point. But they didn't feel there was other things available whilst they were on that waiting list, which is a real challenge.
And from a parent carer's perspective, diagnosis or no diagnosis, my child's needs are my child's needs, regardless of whether somebody can slap a label on them and hang them on a shelf somewhere. The reality for families is, at the moment, currently, up to this point, sometimes waiting for a diagnosis means a door is closed to you for support, and that's not okay. So what we're trying to address through these conversations is by us bringing those parents' journeys and experiences to the table, supporting the wider system and the decision makers to understand how they can address those needs through more proactive support and care, without waiting for diagnostic elements to be put in place, with some triage where we might need to be able to manage access to services in a healthy way so that families don't have unrealistic expectations of when they're going to receive help and support and how much help and support they might receive, but also so that services aren't overwhelmed. But the key thing here is about transparency and being honest about what is within our gift, what isn't within our gift, and ensuring that families understand what is available to them and how they can access it in a way that is suitable to their child's needs as their child's needs are presented, not 6 to 10 weeks down the line or 12 to 18 months later after the child's needs have progressed to the point where they may no longer be in education.
And that's a challenge for mainstream education providers, and actually that's something that's very, very different now than has previously been the expectation. So you'll see further down in the plan reference to the SOAP document, but that is essentially Shropshire's ordinarily available provision. That's outlining our expectations of what should be available in mainstream schools. That fits absolutely strongly with the national reforms that are coming into place. So we're assured that we're on the right direction of travel. We've just got to get the pace moving. So I think your point, Claire, around those dates are there. We've got to deliver to those dates, and we've got to see the work beneath those to actually ensure that happens. And when it doesn't, it's yourselves and the colleagues holding our feet to the fire in terms of this. Yeah.
Thank you. Coming back to on the with the early years. So a child who has language and communication development difficulties, and then the early years setting follows the Talk Boost programme, and the child is still not scoring and has had a very minimum scoring increase after the Talk Boost. When you're chasing up, how quick can we expect after the Talk Boost? Would you expect a referral to be done, expecting that the child is already free and will be starting school in September, and really should have, what is the time? Because what is the time limit? I mean, are you expecting the language and development, speech language appointment to be made after the child's joined school or before the child has joined school? And what would be your aim?
Shall I talk to that as is in terms of the current position, and there's a commitment around commissioning further down in this document?
Well, if we could talk about as it is now, and then how long you expect it to improve.
So in terms of the as is, particular to the speech and language therapy service, if a child or young person requires a specialist pathway, such as dysphagia or dysfluency, they are seen within a timely manner. The 18-week threshold is sort of our has been our benchmark or our measure of that thus far. But if children are waiting for a more general pathway around their language or their communication that requires more general speech and language therapy input, at the moment those children are waiting a considerable time, around 10 months potentially. That's the as is at the moment. In terms of process and actions to move us forward from that, what the plan describes is our commitment around the commissioning structure and our commissioning intentions around speech and language therapy. One of them being the discussion around the joint commissioning of speech and language therapy, mindful that it's a joint commissioning responsibility. I'm wondering if possibly Tracy or Claire, you could talk a little bit more in terms of the commissioning structure and commitments around that.
Yes, I'm happy to. I'll just bring this across so that it picks up my voice. So when we look at our structure as an ICB, and we look at how we have the resources that we've given over into this area for commissioning. I'm sure committee will be aware that we've had a series of interims filling the roles, and we've also had less of an emphasis on our children and young people's role. This speaks a little to what Tanya spoke about, when we as a whole system have had a different focus on older people, ambulance waits, our A&E departments. So we've gone through a process of looking at how we can restructure that, and that's part of my role coming into the team. We've also brought in, underneath me, and you'll see reference to the role within the plan for an associate director who will come across and support. So we will be having 2 more senior roles within the team than we had previously. And this talks a little to the oversight and assurance that has been mentioned earlier, and it'll be in section 10 of the plan when we move to that. But part of that is about looking at how do we hold ourselves to account in the governance structures that we've got in terms of the plans, and Claire has picked up some of those points when you talk about dates and times and needing those milestones, and that's how you hold to account, is actually getting a process through of the milestone development. So we have re-looked at our commissioning structure, and we've put in place processes that will be able to develop project plans with milestones by giving the additional support. We're also looking across to how we work with both local authorities in terms of the joint commissioning. Jen did just mention in terms of our joint responsibilities around some of the things around speech and language. And I think that has to be the way in which we go forward, because I know you will have received and heard about the increasing demand. And I know that we're all acutely aware of our own financial positions within this economy. So in order to deliver differently, we have to plan differently. So we have made those changes, and I'm hoping you'll be able to see the impact of those changes as we develop the plan with the milestones, that we can come back and talk to as to why we've met them, or if we haven't met them, what further actions we're taking. So I do think the change in the strength in how we're going to commission will start addressing some of the things that historically we have perhaps over the last couple of years not had that consistent approach to.
Right, gonna go down.
Okay.
Do you want to carry on, Jen? Yeah.
Is there another question?
Yes, on the next section, Chair.
Oh.
Sure. On this section and all the way through the report, there are a lot of mentions around a survey or surveys.
Yeah.
So is it one survey, or are parents and carers going to be bombarded with lots of surveys?
No, so we developed these impact measures in collaboration with our parents and carers, and it will be one survey opposed to multiple surveys. And we acknowledge the value of surveys, but also really value the other elements of measurements in there, in terms of including outcomes around exclusions, inclusions, how inclusive our settings are, and particular other outcome metrics around talk boost as an approach for speech, language and communication needs. One survey to answer your question.
If I can just say as well that the way we work as an organisation is that we have constant communication with our community. So we speak to them on a regular basis through social media, through mail out, through newsletters, through meeting them in Sainsbury's, wherever we go. So it's an ongoing conversation that will also be supported by specific short surveys or specific questionnaires that we do as an independent organisation as well. So it's not just one system and one process for getting feedback that we're looking at. It's a more wide-ranging approach than that.
And I think that talks to the strength. So actually, it's about that experience, isn't it? And really trying to understand and get below the surface of that. Whereas if you had just one, you're going to get one view, and it might always tell you the same thing. You need to just have a wider range of things, really.
Thank you. Can I just follow up? But on that same section, I'm going to come back to some of the baseline measures later. but I'm just slightly down a bit on that thing. It says families access support which enable them to understand their CYPs and needs and how to support them. And the baseline is roughly 40 not to 5 families access formal support each year. What does 40 look like in the context of how many families need that support?
So I can answer that partly based on memory, but it's embedded in some of our documents that we've sort of the previous iterations. I think from memory that is around 25% of the families that we would want to be supporting in that nature. But I will go away and double check those numbers because that is in memory.
Yeah, so sorry, I'm going to make the point I made. The point I made earlier again. So we have these areas of improvement in November. Okay, they're quite serious. So you're formulating this action plan. So last Thursday, when this was published on the public website, these pages here, you can see them, they're all blank. So I did have a robust conversation with Claire Parker from Health and David, and suddenly within a few days, some of these are filled in. But if you look on here, it says to be developed, to be developed, to be sought, to be sought. Now, I'm here, we're here, because, you know, we're the Children's Performance Scrutiny Committee, and we want to see these improvements, and we want to hold health to account. And I don't have much confidence that maybe it will be put back to the Department of Education and Health by the 6th of April, but I want to know when these things are going to happen. And I don't have much confidence that these things are going to happen in a timely way and, you know, for our kids. And that is echoed all the way through this. And I'm sure Ruth will pick up other things on the way through. And you can't promise me anything, can you, really?
I think if I can come in, I think part of the response that we can give is, obviously this group is doing exactly what you described, Claire. You're holding the partnership to account, and that's actually the role that obviously of her holder, Kirsty, chairs, Vice Chair Sarah, the SEND Partnership Board. So we've got that absolute delivery. What the DfE and NHS England will say is, so that survey to be developed, don't just put something in there that doesn't mean anything. Actually, it's got to be developed in consultation. So some of these things will evolve and will develop. So this plan will continue to change, and we've had that expectation and challenge back from the DfE and NHS England. I think your point's fair. I think some of the questions on here, you know, still need to be developed. In fairness to health colleagues, Jen has been in the inspection window for the last 3 weeks, so that was why the version that was shared last week is the version. That there's no other reason than that. Had we not had that period of time, let's say, you would have got this and, you know, further work on it completed.
Yeah, but this is pretty serious stuff. Ofsted has said, and they have demanded an action plan. So you will have to fill it in, but it's only worth what it's worth. So if Health haven't filled in a lot of it, then you're still going to be in the same position, and you're going to go back talking, and I'm concerned about these children.
Do you want to just explain before we bring Jen in about the process, David? So in terms of since the revisit, we have met with the DfE and NHS England already as a team, haven't we? They very much want this to be a plan that's formulated as a partnership and not just a tick box and exercise. And there's a process, isn't there? So we'll submit the plan and then just talk through to committee what happens next in terms of their assurance and how we're going to work moving forward.
No problem, Tony. So in terms of the draft that we've got here, so obviously we welcome your feedback, and I can see colleagues scribbling notes as we work our way through. We'll take that back and we'll update and make amendments and adaptations to this. This has been shared with the Department of Education and NHS England as well, so we'll take on board their feedback equally as part of this process. We will then pull together the final iteration of this, and then that will be shared with partnership board members, and it can be shared with colleagues in the room as well, actually, if that's the chair's wish. So absolutely we can do that. So again, you see the final version that will be submitted to the Department of Education and NHS England. Once we submit that, they will then formally review and sign the document off in its format in that way. Following that sign-off, we will then move into a period of monitoring. So we will internally keep an eye on this. Obviously, the 3-month, 6-month, 9-month, 12-month milestones. NHS England DfE will formally monitor every 6 months. So there will be a formal monitoring meeting. And again, we will report back to you where that's got to. That will all line up in terms of reporting to the same partnership board and the area partnership. So we've got that clear oversight and governance. But we will continue to have that real challenge and scrutiny with the DfE. And if they're not happy with the progress being made, again, they will flag that with Tanya, with the Chief Executive and other colleagues of Health and the Council. So there's a real clarity around the process following this. But what they will expect us to do, taking the survey as an example, is to develop that as we're working things through. So if we're developing a piece of work, perhaps around a particular pathway or some work around student voice or family voice, that needs to be live and lived and developed. So actually that will be part of those monitoring conversations. So how are we doing that? What does that look like? And again, the DfE and NHS England have said they want to be part of those kind of conversation and development. So we'll have to continue to keep them up to date around this work. Behind this is a whole series of monitoring. So it's almost a little bit of an industry within itself, really, to make sure that we get on a monthly basis a regular report on this. We know where the work streams are up to in terms of progress. That's sent fed back into the partnership board, and that's what will provide the assurance to colleagues like yourselves that overall this is where we are with the plan. So the queries around the brag rating, blue, it's completed, green, it's on track to be completed. Amber, there might be a bit of a delay. Red, we're really concerned there's a significant delay. We can then, through that monitoring, pick up where we need to escalate or challenge, whether that's via commissioning or internally. Clearly, there are some significant resource implications around this, actually. So we're already having the conversations, how do we resource these things? So we know we've got, from a schools and dedicated grant perspective, we've got around £260 million that come into Shropshire from the dedicated schools grant. That's covering schools funding, early years funding, high needs funding, etc. We have council funding. I mean, Tracy and Claire will know far more including the health fund coming into the system. Our challenge is how do we reallocate, move around and redistribute that resource to best deliver this plan quickly, so that the experience of families and young people is what we want it to be. That's the collective challenge. So when I describe the system, I really am saying, well, actually, early years, what are you then doing to actually deliver to this? Schools, what are you doing? And we've had starts to those conversations last Wednesday, we had a session, really good session with secondary leaders in terms of looking at the SEND and AP reforms nationally and what that means for Shropshire. And we'll continue to repeat that in the same way with early years, primary and post-16. So that's the direction of travel. So we are absolutely onto those programmes of work. In that way, I can assure you of that. And similarly, I know, Jen, you can describe the work from speech and language communication and ND, and I know colleagues are connected into that as well. It's not stopped in that we've continued at a pace. Cameron is equally looking at the provision for young people where they require specialist placements, actually, and what the strategy around that and the demand might need to be around that. But I'll save that till we get into the HCP section.
Well, as a school governor, that's good to hear.
So you'll be very familiar in the next few weeks with our STOKE document, actually. So that will launch. We've got the first session the 19th of April, where we're sharing that with secondary primary head teachers.
Councillor Hurst-Knight, you want to speak?
Hopefully you'll be able to hear me. It would be nice to have a place at the table, but I think the most important thing for us to understand today is we will only know when things improve through the very people sat at this table. When the voice of the child and the voice of the family are coming back to us and schools and telling us things have improved. Now, it's a shame this is almost like premature. We've only met once as a strategic board, the new look board, and there was a very different feel to that meeting. I think Claire and the others, Tanya, you'll agree. I think one of our educational psychologists actually said, this feels more like a conversation. And I do believe wholeheartedly to help the young people and children we're talking about, we need to have very uncomfortable, challenging conversations. And I think now we've got the platform to do it. We hadn't before. There's a partnership that reported up to a strategic board that reported back to a partnership. it kind of didn't feel like very words that these ladies will use, co-production. We need to be listening to the voice of the child and the family. And I think through the inspection, that is the one thing that really we have had a light on, a massive light on the point of we need to be listening and then doing the do. And I do believe as a local member and through the council, we all get emails about concerns, frustrations. We will know by what we're being reported back on. I will know as portfolio holder how education are coping. The skills and learning event. I don't believe, and I was told that had never happened before as a council. Officers all got together in one room, shared good practice, and we're moving forward. We have got to look at this differently. We cannot carry on the way we have been. I don't want to forget as well that also on 6 points are the points where a lot of work has happened. A hell of a lot of work has happened on the good to improve by conversations, doing things differently, supporting families. So I think it's important to recognise how far we have come since I started chairing the partnership board. It is uncomfortable, it is challenging, and we absolutely need to continue that challenge, but working together. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you. No. Oh, Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. I do wonder what, this is fantastic to me because the
We've waited a long
communications in the
time for this,
past,
haven't we?
Yeah.
it's been like sort of, how would you call it? It hasn't been good. They haven't been getting together, but I just wonder what happened the years before. Why haven't some of these things are so basic? Why haven't these things happened before? Territorial. People were territorial in the past. But why haven't these things happened before? As I say, they're so basic, but I'm glad they're happening now. I'm really pleased. And Claire nearly touched upon it. And I have to say that the rags, I was reading through it, I thought, the greens are great. What's this blooming?
Yeah.
And then I realised the green was an amber, really.
Yeah.
When everybody knows the green is go. So my advice would be, I'm not criticising, but even now I look at it and look at the greens as go, would be one of the ambers just be hatched or something, and then it stays within the amber then, and the green means what it means. Thank you.
I think I can just respond. We've had that debate. The reason we've got the blue there is to actually say we've completed that. Because I think the other bit that we find difficulties and we've not been good at, that we've completed that, right, let's move on. So I think that's what's happened previously. And when we started to meet as a group together to break this down, what we found is there has been progress, but actually not consistently. So some of the detail you see around the differences in the pathways for different age ranges of young people, and that's looked quite different actually. And until you describe it in that specific way, you don't quite make sense of it. So I definitely accept the point. I'm hoping colleagues will see as we get into this that the RAG and the BRAG will become clearer.
RAG buzz.
Well, possibly. We had that debate with another local area this morning, actually, when we talked about them. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So we're still on, we're talking about the ASD and ADHD pathways, and that point 6 is acknowledging that there's some experience, and there has been some experience historically around challenges of getting children into the diagnostic pathways. So those commitments there are around transparency of how to access the service and clarity around referral criteria, as well as elements of that pathway, which David's just alluded to, being very proactive in terms of supporting referrers to understand the process and support them to make successful referrals into the system. Point 7, again, it was picked up in the inspection outcome report around challenges about communication from the service. So we know as a system we have long waits for diagnostic appointments. And it's really essential that our services are very transparent in terms of these waits and also in terms of what is available for children and young people whilst they wait. Again, talking to the waiting well. So work is underway in terms of reviewing that communication with our parent carer forum and others across the system.
Could I just ask a short question? I'm hoping it's a typo actually. With the redesign of the referral form provided 5 to 18-year-old cohort. Is there's April 24, and that's 12 months away. Is that fast enough? Or is that a typo?
That must be a typo.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
We'll pick it up actually, make sure that's updated.
In terms of section 8, this is picking up the acknowledgement of the experience of some families and children and young people around going into crisis. We heard this through the SEND inspection, and obviously as a system we are really concerned about this. So these actions, some of them are already in place around looking at the child who's coming into the diagnostic service from a holistic point of view, considering whether they require quicker support from a mental health support element of the service, whilst they wait for a diagnostic appointment, and ensuring that all of that support is available and accessible to them whilst they're waiting. So progress has been made in terms of that. There's also been progress around some protocols about expediting certain children and young people to have a diagnostic appointment quicker. As a system, we want that protocol around risk stratification to be more robust than it is at present, and this the final action there is around some additional funding to support risk stratification to, like I say, be more robust in the service.
And I think Jennifer, if I can just add there, so the person named Helen Southwell, for the first time came to the same partnership board and actually presented and was very clear in terms of the waiting times, the challenges. That hasn't happened before. So again, that's an example specifically around how we're connecting things together, and then information is shared back to that group and vice versa. So it's essential that we can continue that joining up, but that grip around these areas. And actually, I think it's absolutely right and proper that Helen and that group really look at those performance indicators for this particular part of the plan. It's absolutely the bread and butter, isn't it, in terms of the work that they're doing.
So it's not captured here, but the Learning Disability and Autism Programme have set waiting times as their priority for 2023, which is really welcomed and will support in terms of the grip around the waiting time initiatives and improvements that need to be made. In terms of action 9, they are all actions around commissioning, around reviewing what's the demand and the capacity. Lots of this, I mean, it talks about understanding of waits and wait times. We actually have that information, but we know that it needs to be considered again in the full, whilst also considering trajectories for the future and business cases for the future to meet needs. What's not captured here is there are some short-term funding, additional short-term funding that has been implemented at the moment across the system. We have 150 children who are going through an ASD assessment additionally to the Core Commission service, but that's not captured as much because we know that this plan is about achieving sustainable change, and there's absolute clarity that this is how we are going to sustainably manage and support this cohort of children and young people, rather than what has previously happened in terms of short-term non-recurrent funding. The last 2 points are around skill mix, which obviously the services are themselves looking at and reflecting on, mindful that there's some challenges around workforce recruitment and retention, and the services are having to be, and us as a system, are having to be very dynamic in terms of looking at opportunities within skill mix to complete diagnostic assessments and also contribute in terms of the support for those children and young people post-diagnosis.
I would, from parent carers perspective and from PAC's perspective as well, we would really encourage members to, while recognising that waiting lists are really important and waiting times and waiting for a long time is not great, we do need to move away from that being the only focus of activity, addressing waiting list, because we have seen, Zara and I have been involved in this work for a long time, since, for the past 10, 12, 15 years, and we've seen repeated focus on just simply reducing waiting lists, and all that happens is we keep getting back into the same system again, and we need to support families you know, we need to think about the experience on that waiting, while they're waiting, you know, what options are there instead of going? Do they have a choice? You know, they might not necessarily want to go down the diagnostic path. A lot of our families are forced down that route because they think it's the only route to go because other doors aren't being opened. So, you know, we've spent a lot of time trying to persuade the people sitting here today that they need to do something different. They need to actually, actually think about the wider system and how the system's working, not just focus on the length of time somebody is on a waiting list. So we just really strongly like to make that point.
So yeah, I'll take on board what you're saying there, but I think there needs to be consistency of service. So on that basis, there needs to absolutely be a dedicated budget and a dedicated budget for each particular discipline within this action plan, so that everybody knows exactly where they are. Because I think, you know, what you're saying is you wouldn't mind a wait if you knew you were going to get it, but you need to know what's there, and you need to know that it's going to be this year and next year. So I would have thought if you're doing an action plan, it's a bit like a business plan. I've never known a bank lend anybody any money on a business plan that didn't have all the facts and figures in there. So are you going to actually put money in there for, you know, for going forward about what's allocated to what?
Tracy, can I pass that to you as a commissioning perspective?
Fine. So I think we need to be clear on the purpose of this plan, and we've spoken about it and what it's addressing. The second point you make is about the clarity and transparency of how much budget is dedicated to particular service areas. I think we need to think about what this plan is for. So if we did put a budget there, I would want to understand how that would enhance the plan. So I think I probably want to talk a little bit more, Claire, about why that's important to you.
Okay, so I think the thing is, part of all this is where your priorities lie. Okay, so there's a range of children with a range of different needs. Okay, some needs are more expensive than others. So I think it would be helpful for you as well if you understood the priorities, and you could understand the priorities because you follow the money. So you need to know, because, you know, if for instance your child has autism and there's only 50 grand in that pot, but you've got a child who's lost a leg or a limb and there's £500,000 in that pot, and you think to yourself you might be luckier in this than the other. You know, you have to understand these things, I think.
So you would see the amount of money as being reflective of a priority in that sense then? Is that how you
Well, I think the thing is, as a parent, if I had a child with a particular need, if I could see there wasn't much money in the pot, I'd be quite upset. I don't know how much all these things cost. You know, all I'm trying to do is make sure that we have a consistent and good service that will be delivered in the long term. Because what we've got at the moment is we've got a plan, and you know, and everyone would be quite content with the plan if you delivered on the plan. But there is a concern, I think, about the actual ability to deliver on the plan, especially because you've couched it in terms about your particular budgets at the you know, within health. So that's another worry, because what we want is we want to see delivery.
And I think, just going back to what Tanya said, that's about raising the profile of children and young people at a higher system level, in terms of understanding that children and young people, there are risks in that system too, and that there needs to be seen as a priority alongside the needs of older people and the needs of acute care, which that hasn't been up until now. And so those conversations are happening. This plan itself is part of that process, I would say.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we have seen a difference in is the conversations around commissioning. So we sit on the joint commissioning group. We sit in conversations on work streams where they're talking about developing business plans and looking at contracts that are coming up that need to be recommissioned in the future. and the conversations and co-production opportunities that are happening there around using what money is already in the system more wisely and being more conscious of the connections that these contracts could have, rather than working on them in complete isolation all the time, which is where we say that this isn't always a health problem or it isn't always a social care problem. It's about the connectivity between it all, which includes having the KPIs and the data initiatives written into contracts that drive that connection to happen across services, but also looking at the funding, even if it is a health-owned commission, looking at the commissioning process in a collaborative way with co-production with families, so that we understand that there might not be an increase in the budget, or there might be another pot of money available in 6 months' time for a 12-month window for a specific project. But how can we use that smartly so that we can deliver the impact for families, but also so that it is understood from a family's perspective from the very start, so that we don't end up with those commissions happening in isolation and then being delivered without families actually being thought about throughout the process and influencing and informing the decision making along the way.
And to further add to that, through the SYP summit, we agreed an action in terms of looking at demand and capacity across our system, recognising that across all the system partners, there has been a real increase in demand for services. And we know there were gaps, but we know with the increase in demand, there are further gaps. And we have committed as system partners to really understand the demand and capacity in this system to see whether or not A, are we commissioning the right services? B, is there enough of it? And then we can then take that through the strategic ICS board to actually ask for further investment across health and social care.
Can I go back to when you spoke about waiting times, and we mustn't sort of put that as a priority or whatever in our minds.
No, it is a priority, but it's not the only priority.
Right, okay. When I came into council 2013, we had CAMS, and it was a mess. I don't blame anybody. I don't understand what's going on in the background, but it was a mess, and people were waiting for years, and it was years. And then it changed about 2016, 2015, and still we had the same. It's still, if anything, it's got worse. So I'm glad, I'm really pleased you haven't made some sort of promise about waiting times, you know. But the people that need to understand this is the families, and I'm sure you do speak to them and reassure and that sort of thing, do you?
Communication is absolutely key.
Right,
It's the thing that it's the one thing that I would say actually has made the less progress on, and it's a thing that we do need to embed more in our work, and transparency as well about that, so people understand and build relationships.
For us as an organisation, as a representative organisation, that's our role, is we come to the table as people speaking on behalf of the wider community, and we genuinely do have that regular touch base. But what Sarah's alluding to is the fact that the system is yet to be as proactive in this particular area of transparency and communication as we would like it to be, because there are still gaps in some of the opportunities to really genuinely take the whole community on the journey. We're having to be, the middleman, as it were, which is okay in part, but on the whole, we want the whole community to be invested as much as we are as representatives of the community, and to genuinely feel what we feel, because while the impact in service delivery might not be there, if there's continued communication, they won't be surprised when things like waiting times don't suddenly dramatically improve within the next 6 months, from an 18-month waiting list to a 2-month waiting list, for example.
Yeah. So, right, great. See, I've had, and I'm sure councillors have had lots of people phoning them up about, I can't get my child diagnosed, they won't. So, the last one I had was a 5-year-old that didn't see anybody till they were 7.5. That's half that child's life. And then we had a visitor here telling us about her twins. They weren't diagnosed until they were nearly adults from childhood. So what worries me is that what the thing is that if you have an illness and you don't know what that illness is, many people have said when it's been diagnosed, I can start now. I can start to get myself better. I can start to live, and that's so. I got this picture. How do you see waiting this, say, in 3 years' time?
Okay, so a diagnosis is hugely important for enabling a young person to understand themselves, their strengths, to find their tribe, to feel as a sense of belonging. But actually what we hear from families as well is that a diagnosis didn't change anything in terms of the support that they received. It didn't change anything in how schools responded to the need of their child. Their school still didn't understand. It didn't change anything in terms of how the mental health needs of their child were supported. So what we're saying is that the impact of the condition that you might be diagnosed with is there whether you've got a diagnosis or not. And so what we want to see schools that are well educated and well understand how to support neurodiverse children. That depends on the environment, whether the environment, the way teachers communicate, the way they respond to behaviour that they might see as challenging. All these things can happen with or without a diagnosis. We'd like to see parents not feel isolated so that they can come together. They can maybe talk with practitioners around the sorts of issues that they might come across. They can be supported to implement different strategies in the home, and they can be supported not to think about, see themselves as failing. And then they can have a choice, because it's a choice as to whether they want to apply for a diagnosis or not to going forward. So in the short term, we don't see waiting lists as particularly reducing. There is a national issue with this. There is a national issue that's related to funding, that's related to workforce, to having the appropriate people in place, that is going to take years to address. What we need to do is make sure people aren't destroyed during that period.
And also, I think to add to that is in Shropshire specifically, because up until now, systemically, we haven't focused on children and young people's needs. We've been focused on our ageing population as our primary target audience. That actually, they're not a priority. So up to this point, we've not made much of an effort to focus on fixing some of those issues. So they've just kind of sat there stagnating and potentially increasing and getting worse. And I think with this renewed focus, and as we say from the SEND Complex Needs Summit, that refreshed kind of everybody being on the same page and everybody having the same ambitions, from our perspective as community champions is, our beg to the system is that we don't get tunnel vision and we don't keep going down rabbit holes of fixing one problem because that's the bit that the DFE and NHS England have told us to fix, when actually that problem is exacerbated by a multitude of other things. And I think one of the things that I'd really like to pick up on that isn't on the agenda today is actually our SEND strategic action plan that sits above and beyond this, that this is an extract of, is the wider vision of how we're going to support SEND families in our community and how the system is then going to be mechanised to be more suitable to meet the needs of our children and young people as they grow into our ageing population moving forward. And I think we need to be really mindful that this is just a small snapshot of the much bigger picture. So the bits that are missing from this that you might be really wanting to hear about are most likely going to be captured in there over time, if not already.
Thank you.
So just going on from there again, I still feel that there should be an overall commissioning budget for this work, for this whole thing. There needs, otherwise, how are you going to plan? How are you going to commission?
And of course, there will be a commissioning budget. And if we look at the actions on the previous page, they were all talking to, apologies, they were talking to the demand and capacity. And we need to think not only of the budget that we currently hold, but how are we going to work differently in the context of the needs. And the needs will come through from those actions that are down there to be completed during Q1 in terms of what our demanded capacity is. Because I don't know, I think it might have been Tanya who referenced it. We need to be looking at what business cases need to go forward. You mentioned it about a bank wouldn't lend any money without a business case, and indeed a new commissioning plan would not go forward without equally demanded capacity and business case to support it. So of course there will be structure around that. It's just talking to what do we have in this particular plan, what do we have in the SEND plan, what do we have in the LD&A plan, and part of that is about really understanding all of the plans, bringing them together in one place. So I would just say that in terms of priority, we talk about whether money equals priority. All of the points that we have in this plan are the priorities that we'll be working on going forward. And part of that will be negotiations around how much money we've currently got in budget as health. And we must be really clear, this is a partnership approach. I know a few times you've spoken to health and what are health doing. This is partnership approach, so it's all of us together, and we need to think about that in budget terms as well.
Yeah, so the reason I said about health was because if you look at the findings from the Ofsted, the ones that need improvement are more or less all directed at health.
So we need to think about them in partnership.
I agree, we need to think about them in partnership. But I think it is frustrating, you know, when you're a partner and you can see, you know, that there are issues, because it's incumbent upon that partner to step up to the plate. And I think what worries me on top of all that is the actual delivery, because you might have a plan and you might say all this, but we could be sat here in another 6 months looking at the same thing. So that's where my concerns stem from.
If I can just come in there, I mean, we absolutely can't be sat here in another 6 months looking at the same things. That is absolutely not where it can be. So you've got absolutely my assurance on that. I think coming back to the funding perspective, we are already exploring and adapting, and we'll talk about some of this in the ECP section, how we adjust, make changes to whether it's the dedicated schools grant budgets, the high needs blocks, community years. We're having a conversation schools forum around this. So again, that flow through is happening from a council, so dedicated school grants education perspective, because it's really clear that school leaders, schools forum, second heads we spoke to last week, there are challenges, but obviously, you know, we're not expecting a magic money tree to pop up and rescue us here, but we can invest and change the way we're using the money we've got now. I think that's the key thing that we're already looking at. So that's moving us into some very challenging conversations, and I'm not going to lie about that. But that's where we need to be. You know, we can't continue what we've always done because it's delivered what we're seeing. And you've said consistently, families have said, you're not happy with that. So when I get challenged back from school leaders, head teachers, early year settings, this is why we've got this change programme. This is why we need to do things differently, because we're hearing it has to look and feel different, which is not easy for anyone, but we have to have those conversations, and they're robust and they're challenging.
Thank you, Chair. As we're touching on money, can I just check how PAC are funded and is it adequate?
That's a really interesting question. So we are funded by the effectively it's the participation fund that is hosted by Contact, who used to be known as Contact Family, on behalf of the Department for Education. We are funded to the tune of 17,500 a year, of which only up to 50% of that can be used for staffing costs. The rest of it has to be funded on participation activity, or activity that promotes participation within each local area. We do work with local systems on opportunities where we could be funded to support participation in different ways. So one of those is we act as the participation element of the Actio Consortium, who are the kind of commissioning partner for the all in short breaks targeted offer, and we are funded for a small amount within that for administration, communications and marketing support that we deliver for that particular project. We're funded for several other small projects, such as our preparation for adulthood navigators. We delivered the Healthy Lives programme last year. You can talk
we've
about
actually been funded quite considerably through the Learning Disability and Autism Programme recently, which is who fund our Preparation for Adulthood Navigators, which is a 3-year commitment to a full-time post, responding directly to what families said they needed in terms of somebody to talk to and to support them to navigate the system through that very difficult time. We also work with public health, and on the personalisation agenda, there's been a number of some money come through. We're very good value for money, and we're very effective in how we use our money. Zara and I are not paid full time. The majority of our hours are volunteered, and we keep going through other aspects of our lives. We at the moment have 5 people who have some element of funded hours, but only 1 person who is full time. And it is challenging. In saying that, we are very keen to ensure that our independence is maintained. So we have been very clear when we've spoken to the local authority or health colleagues that what we would look at is funding for projects rather than expecting people with whom we have to challenge to be funding our core roles, because we don't feel that that sits comfortably. But if you do have any extra money down the back of the safe, you can take it from me.
Well, they know grant organisations rather than hard cash in the Shropshire account. Thank you.
So if we move on to speech and language, the speech language therapy service and the actions around that, it follows a similar themes in terms of the actions around supporting clarity and clear offer of support. And the first set of actions, and then actions to support our early years settings and education settings. As talked to previously, a lot of that is through the Talk Boost initiative. There are other initiatives that sit alongside that. And then actions around supporting parents and carers. The last point there around maintaining the SLT service advice line. So this is an easily accessible phone line which parents, carers and practitioners can contact. They get a call back within a couple of days, and they can talk through the specific needs of a child or young person, and could be signposted to different interventions commonly used and readily available online in various formats. And people can keep on contacting that advice line, and that advice line has been initiated in 2022 and was driven from the challenge around demand and the capacity of the service. But it's been really welcome from our parents and carers in our education settings in terms of being a very responsive resource that's helped meet the needs whilst somebody is waiting for formally entering the system. So Shropshire Community Health Trust have emulated that in their OT service, and they're also going live for their child development service. So there's a similar offer there around support on the end of the phone for those before they're seen in the service, or if they're seen in the service but want some support in between. So that's been one of the initiatives that's been really well received as a local area, and we're keen to ensure the commissioning around that to make sure that it's a permanent picture in terms of their support on offer. And then moving through to the impact matrix before, a lot of those are around how what people are reporting around their experience of the service and the support available, as well as around the specifics of the impact of Talk Boost. And for early years, I'm looking at how our cohort do with their early years foundation stage outcomes when that comes through. There's obviously a time delay in terms of those particular outcomes. And then this latter point again is around the commissioning of support, and it follows a similar model of actions, but there's an acknowledgement around speech and language therapy around the joint commissioning responsibilities that there are for speech and language therapy. So we've already initiated joint commissioning conversations about that. And there's also the element around the necessity of service specification to be reviewed collaboratively to make sure the service is fit for purpose across the system for our children and young people.
And then I think we move on to Karen with area 5. So this is around educational care plans.
Okay, everybody. So the third area that was identified as still needing improvement was around education, health and care plans. And in essence, as you can see from the report, the main areas of that were the quality of our new plans, also that there was a weakness in our quality assurance system, and also the quality of our and timeliness of our reviews for what we call annual reviews. So you will all know that children with education, health and care plans are children for whom the highest level of support and provision is required within that triangle and that pinnacle of the system. And our overarching aim within this is actually to thank you. So our overarching aim in this was to actually ensure that not only is the quality of the plan, of the piece of paper, the legal document, is improved, but also to ensure that the right support for the children and that the children have their needs identified and achieve the outcomes that they're capable, and also that they're successfully prepared for adulthood. So the first area that we've looked at is the quality of the actual education, health and care plans themselves. What you'll see from the actions that we've aligned to that is that a number of them are what you would perhaps consider to be very basic actions in terms of steps that we're taking in terms of reviewing the pathway and the process and the paperwork that sits around that. And I make no apology for that. The reason being is that we've spoken to a number of our families, we've actually sat down with our parent carer forum, we've spoken to our partners across the system, and we've actually said, so we need to get this right. What do we need to do to get this right? The response to that was, we need to go back to basics. And that was a very loud message, particularly around from our parents and carers. So the actions here around the new plans in particular were to go back to basics. So you can see that there's, as I said, a number of actions about improving the process and the pathway. However, there was a step before that, we felt, and David has mentioned it a couple of times already this morning, and it was around understanding those children in terms of the SEN system who do actually meet those thresholds for education, health and care plans. So in essence, what do we expect our providers, our education providers across the system to be providing for our children and young people prior to them coming through for an education, health and care plan? So in essence, the language that we use and the words that we use are around ordinary available provision. And you'll be aware from the recent publication is that is now in many respects the direction of travel of the government as well. So we were already involved in having those discussions here locally in Shropshire, and as part of that, we had back in February we had a whole day where we invited providers across the board from early years right the way through to post 16 to sit down with us and our parents groups and our other agencies to actually talk about that conversation about, so how do we describe what is expected, what is ordinarily available, and to work on a toolkit around that. So the actual plan around that is that we have got now a number of workshops and briefings which will actually now flesh that out, with an aim to that being a sort of a draft toolkit produced by the end of June, when we're having a further launch, and then in September we will have a go live approach and document around that. And the reason it is so important is because actually we've got to make sure that we've got the right pathways and processes in place for our children and young people. So as I said, most of the actions there listed are very practical, very sort of basic actions. The other sorts of actions you can see in there is around us reviewing our business processes across the system, so not only just internally within the SEN team, but with our partners as well. So one of the steps in terms of producing an education, health and care plan is that we are required by law to obtain advice from our statutory partner agencies. And so within this document, we've gone back to basics and said, so how do we go about obtaining that? And not only that, how do we go about ensuring that our whole workforce is trained so that they actually do contribute to that in the appropriate way of the appropriate quality as well. And then on that particular section as well, clearly within this, although the inspection report did not pick up per se on co-production around our individual co-production around our education, health and care plans, of course for us across the sector, it is absolutely really important, but it also means that it delivers good quality plans if we've got the co-production right in terms of this. And in order to support that and strengthen that, one of the actions in there you will see is around developing a digital portal that will enable us to have more transparency, but will enable us to collaborate across the system with parents, with families, with partners across the system to support that. And I just want to pick up earlier in terms of the sort of the budget conversation as well. And actually, I think it's quite important here that we acknowledge that that would be a system whereby we can actually streamline some of the large administrative processes and a lot of the bureaucracy that sits around the statutory education system. Okay, so the next section then, in the next theme, as I've already mentioned, the inspectors were not satisfied that we didn't have a sufficiently robust quality assurance process in place. So the next set of actions are all around developing that quality assurance process, starting with us having an agreed set of standards around education, health and care plans. Now, you will be aware that we already have published a set of standards in conversation with our parent carers and our families and our partners across the system. We felt, again, going back to basics, it was very timely to actually review those standards and make sure that those standards are agreed and across the partnership, so that that will be defining exactly what a good quality education, health and care plan looks like in Shropshire. Okay, and then using an audit process and a cycle of audits in order for us to be then checking back against those quality standards and also then feeding any improvements back into the system in a cyclical approach. And then thirdly, in terms of the final area of this particular section, the actions that we've identified are around what do we do about those children and young people who already have education, health and care plans in the system, whose plans are perhaps not of the quality we would like, also require an annual review, and we have a number of plans that are not being reviewed within a timely manner. So again, going back to basics, with developing and implementing what we call an annual review recovery plan. And behind that is the purpose to ensure that all of those children and young people, and we have just over 2,000 children and young people in Shropshire now with education, health and care plans, that their plans are reviewed in terms of a process. And what sits behind this, as we've already suggested in the earlier conversations, is some more detail that sits about how we will go about that in terms of the priority groups that we will do that. Clearly, and practically speaking, it's not going to be possible to review all of those 2,000 plans within a very short timescale. That is going to have to be over a period of time. But within that, and speaking across the partnership, we felt it's important to identify certain priority groups within that. So one of those priority groups, you will have perhaps already heard, is the what we call phase transfers. So those are about children and young people who may be transitioning from one area of education to another area of education. So, for example, from primary school to secondary school, or from secondary school to post-16. Within that as well, there is also implications then for the capacity of the officers and of the SEN team to do that, and capacity within the system. So one of the actions you can see there draws our attention to reviewing that structure within the SEN team. I'm going to pause there for any comments or questions.
Sorry, yeah, thanks. I'm not going to let the opportunity go, actually. I'll have you all to ask questions. I note, your 2,000 plans to be reviewed, and you mentioned a timescale. But I do wonder whether your audit measures have been optimised, because around 30% of reports were received on time and 40% of performance monitoring showing timescales are met, whether those targets are aspirational enough. And another question is, how are you going to capture some of the emerging or potentially emerging issues coming out of that review process and those audits?
Okay. Do you want me to respond? Yeah. So in terms of the aspirational targets, thank you very much for that feedback. As we've said right the way through this meeting, it's a very good opportunity for us to be here, for you to actually sort of challenge us on that and actually quite rightly raise sort of whether we've got this about right. In terms of that, I agree with you. It might not look challenging enough at this point in time. Our aspiration or our ambition will be 100%, and I can absolutely confidently say that that's our aspiration and ambition. In terms of how this plan is actually written and set up, that 30% really is around our initial kind of baseline. So what we want to do is within those priority groups. So around about 30% of that priority group would have reached that required standard in the first instance. It's not a static indicator. It's not we only want 30% of ours to reach the required standard. That is actually the starting point, and that's what we're moving towards.
That need to be noted then in this as a plan that's being submitted. That's a starting target.
I was going to say you're absolutely right, and I think that's how the plan is actually sort of set out. If you can see, it says baseline, so that's our kind of like baseline. So what will follow on from this plan that the DFE will be looking for us to submit is what's called a scorecard, really. So what they will be then looking for is that increase over what's your 3-month level, what's your 6-month level, what's your 12-month, and then what's your 18-month level.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
No, I don't see any.
I think, Chair, it's just okay. I think obviously we presented to this point. Absolutely, this is this bit of the plan. This is the APP. What we'd be really keen to do is, I would probably say in the autumn term, come back to this committee with the full plan. How it connects to the strategy, those indicators we talked about in terms of KPIs and performance. So you can see, you've heard this now with this snippet. What does it look like across the piece actually? And then you can again judge and we can demonstrate the journey and progress we're making against not just the indicators, but how things fit together. And again, that can be shared publicly because we want to absolutely be transparent in this. This will, once finalised, be on the local offer website for everyone to see and be really, really clear. So I would suggest that would be a recommendation of mine to bring that all together if that's okay.
It's on my list already.
Fantastic.
So if we're at recommendation time, I've got a recommendation to add to bringing this report back. What I'd like to recommend is that Peggy actually goes to Cabinet and voices her concerns about Health's ability to actually commission and deliver the plan, because it does give me concern, and then they can do as they wish. They may wish to write to the Department of Education or Health, but I do have concerns in that area, and I think it's right that we should voice them here at this particular scrutiny about that. And as I say, I'm quite happy to Peggy said about bringing hers back. I'm happy to add to that to mine. I don't know if I've got a seconder or David seconded me. There you go.
All in favour?
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Have you finished as well? Have you finished what you wanted to say as well? Sorry.
Yes.
You're done. Oh, yes, sorry.
Just like the final comment of huge thanks to our children, young people and their families for their contribution to in this end revisit inspection. At the time, the Ofsted inspectors were really impressed by the feedback they got in the Shropshire system from our families. Of over 700, I think it was, families commenting around their experiences, and the Ofsted inspector was really impressed about the engagement and then the level of engagement from our families. So we'd like to put on record our absolute thanks and our commitment as a partnership to get this right, for all children and young people, their families, all of the time, not just for the few. And our commitment to know that what's happened in the past can't happen in the future, and that we won't be coming to this committee again with this level of plan, in terms of, we know we're going to make progress, accelerated progress, but also progress against the wider strategy plan of which Zara referenced. And that's really important for this system, because we mustn't just focus on these 3 areas. There's a much wider picture here that this system is currently working on. But thank you to the committee for hearing the papers today and for the challenge. But I hope you feel assured with only the SYP Summit report, but also this report. This is a partnership of change, with absolute partnership working with our children and their families, supported by PAC. So thank you.
We have a list of recommendations. Everybody in agreement with them? Do you want me to read them out?
Hold on, I just moved a recommendation and everyone voted on it, Peggy.
What about the list that's on here?
Well, I disregarded that. I did our own.
I thought that was an addition.
Was it?
I thought it was
Because I think, well,
Hey,
who's because the health report's got different recommendations to David's report. David Shaw's report. There's 2 sets of recommendations.
There are, I mean, I think in terms of the rethinking of the report we've just gone through in terms of the APP, the recommendations there are very much what you've heard in terms of, we have made some progress, we're not there yet. I think that's absolutely correct. We've got some work to do, but I've just tried to cite in there that cross-working, which is absolutely vital. We're not going to deliver what we need to deliver without that. So you've seen there the connection with the LD&A board, again, that learning disability and autism focus, that the Shropshire Health Integrated Place Partnership got to be connected into that. So it's just trying to cite committee members on those recommendations. I'm happy in terms of chair, whichever you choose. It's just to bring those together. I think Claire's report was around taking that as a system level, because that's the conversation that we've had in that direction. So I don't think it contradicts with what Claire you've described at all in terms of that's the recommendation.
I thought I moved a recommendation. It was seconded and voted upon, and there were 2 items on there. So.
tell me what they were again.
You got them written down there, have you? What have you got down there, actually? Basically, what I wanted was for Peggy to go to Cabinet, and say to Cabinet basically that they had concerns about the commissioning and delivery of the health part of the accelerated action plan, and if they wish to write to the Department of Education or Health, then they would be more than welcome to do that. So it's up to them to decide what they do. But I just think it's right that we raise those concerns, because that's what we're talking about today. And the other bit of it was I think what David said about thanking all the groups who've taken part.
Yeah.
And I think it's right we take both reports together, because it's just one action plan. And it is good that that of the people who give up their time to actually put some common sense into the system.
Yeah.
I think this might add to it. It might cause more confusion. I think it's not a bad idea that it comes back to members in terms of the strategy and the progress. I got a bit of grit in the oyster, which is what are you going to be asked to do? You shouldn't be being asked to note reports or receive things for information. You should be getting pieces of work which you can get into. And today's conversation actually I think was a really good conversation. You asked challenging questions, you heard challenging dialogue between the partners on this, and that was good. So if it's going to come back to you, I think for my challenge in this would be if it's about making sure that you're informed as members about what's happening, what's going on, it's a conversation that as officers we can have in terms of whether it's a briefing session, and then you pick some specific points out of that, because there's an awful lot to go at here. And you know, you can't eat the whole elephant, and there might be a herd in here somewhere to work through. The other bit with it, as well as thought, is I think there's some really strong views and strong thoughts and ideas around this. So not one they necessarily have to think about or come to a decision now, but possibly as a recommendation would be that you consider exploring having a working group, or it could be a rolling task and finish group of members from the committee who track alongside this and pick up some of those points that were raised in terms of challenges and questions. It takes it outside of the committee meeting, but also means that those involved develop their knowledge and their experience in what's happening, but can also feed back in this case back to the committee at either fixed points in the year or about specific things you've got concerns about that you think the committee should be aware of and should be picking up on. There's a bit of work to do about how we do in terms of reference to that and what's there. But again, I guess it's just an option that you can consider in terms of looking at things in a different way and using your time as a committee.
Can I just say there, Tom? I mean, what you're talking about is basically the new scrutiny arrangements, where if we change from 5 committees to 4, where there will be officer briefings with directors and yourselves, or where we will decide on the work programme. And I think this is absolutely an ideal sort of topic for it. But I don't think we can preempt that because that's going to be happening in May. So I think when we have that meeting, that's when we have to look at that. We can't set anything up now because scrutiny is changing. We'll change after full council.
Well, no, you can't
Sound predetermined there.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. I am predetermined on that one, Ruth, but I'll still be voting.
I mean, absolutely quite right in terms of doing the work programming and committee assessment work programming. I think it's more whether there's is it a topic then that goes forward to that work programming conversation? And it's just making sure that you are, or any committee, is focused on being able to get to grips with the topics, which are coming before them.
3.7 and 3.8 recommendations are really important. That it's recommended that SHIP and the Learning Disability and Autism Board include a standing agenda item or a similar approach to ensure key items, papers related to the Area SEND partnership can be raised with SHIP/LDA members. And 3.8 is schedule biannual updates for the People Overview Committee on the progress of the SEND action plan, including the accelerated progress plan and the impact this is making to improve the experience and outcomes of children and young people with SEND. So I would want those two included. Okay.
So, yeah, everyone happy?
Okay. Yeah. Right. Be rest assured we will still be watching you. I came on this board in 2009 because I was a governor at 3 schools and I had real concerns about what was happening with the children. He came on with me, Kevin did, in 2009, didn't you? 2009.
Thanks for that.
And we've
yes, it was 13.
And him and I have had this concern. I can honestly say, can't I, for a long, long time. And I think this is the first time. Feels like a breath of fresh air that something is really going to happen.
Definitely.
So thank you all so much for your participation in the meeting today. I'm going away feeling we might be getting somewhere now, and that is a heck of a feeling. I shall enjoy my next governors meeting. Thank you all. Okay, thank you. Yeah. So work programme. We can't do yet. No. Next meeting is 24th of May, but being this is the last meeting of this committee, can I take this opportunity to thank members for their participation through the last year And special thanks to the lady on my right and all their officers for the darn hard work they do. They've come to meetings, they've answered all our questions. I think it's been a good year. Thank you all.